you know, think like you do. And, you know, appreciate the way we all see things differently. And so when you hear me waxing on about sort of more nitty-gritty aspects of movement, that's simply the way I analyse an ATM. I'm just offering it to you as that. And there is no expectation or aspiration that you'll analyse an ATM exactly like I do. You might have a whole different lens about it. You know, I mean, Zoran can wax on about an ATM from a really kind of anthropological, historical perspective about, you know, when these movements first appeared and this and that and the other. And so he can have this whole other depth of analysis. And I know last week we talked to you about the different level, you know, ways we can analyse a lesson. And you know, we were talking on Sunday that reminded me of in year 9 high school, we had this really amazing, slightly autistic English teacher come in as a replacement, and we did Lord of the Flies. And the year 9 people, we had to analyse it on 7 different levels. And it wasn't to say that any one level, you know, there's sort of pragmatic level about what actually happened, what the little boys did. We had to analyse it on the religious level, and the political level, and I can't remember what the levels are. But, you know, that process, I'm sure you all did it at school as well, and you had to go through the book and pull out the language that related to the religious level, or pull out the language that was related to the political level. So all of those levels were in that book. You could see it as a political manifesto, you could see it as a religious manifesto, you could see it as something else. None of them are wrong, they're just different lenses. And that's what this method is for us as teachers, and what's kept us interested. Is when you get sick of one lens, you can try different. So don't necessarily aspire to think like I do. That's what I'm saying. And because we're not going to create a curriculum necessarily that will do that. You know, I have what I have. You have what you have. And that part of this is about finding out what you already know, right? And bringing that into honouring that and bringing that into the method. And all of you are incredibly diverse. You know, my colleagues at home keep saying, "Oh, what sort of students do you have?" Because I have a physio background. Are they all physios? And I said, actually, very, you know, no, not at all. There's usually a couple in the group, but not. I mean, how many physios are there in the group? 2, 1 or 2. So that's a myth in itself. No, it's not a method particularly. What is the reality, if you think of your backgrounds, is that almost all of you have a different background from each other. That's what's actually common in the training program, is the diversity of the students, and that speaks to the method. I convinced you that you don't feel bad if you don't follow what I'm saying. Ask me questions, but don't feel like you have to think like I do. All right. But having said all of that, now I'm going to make you feel worse, not worse, but because Larry and I think quite similarly. Because we have, you know, roughly the same. He doesn't have a clinical background. He has a pure movement science background. So it's more from it's not a clinical human movement background. It's movement. And he's got a very fine brain, and he's obviously got, you know, pulsating frontal lobes that like to categorize and make frameworks. So SWIFR is one of his frameworks that he offers up to help people structure their observations. So you can see why it's quite a nice tool to help you when you're looking at students doing ATM and you just don't know where to start in your looking. You don't know what to look at. So have you had that experience watching your 2 students? Like, what am I looking at here? What bits of them do I pay attention to? Yep. So this is his one way of structuring it, which you can take and leave, and take up again and leave. Now he has studied the Laban stuff. I haven't, so apparently he has drawn from that a bit. And that's so those of you with a dance background might recognise some things. That, but I can't pull that out because I don't share that part. Now, as I've already told you, these acronym things do my head in, so I've got notes. Because I just simply not, is it a mnemonic when you have a word with the letters? No. It's still an acronym. I won't let that go, will I? Okay. Ah, is it? And mnemonic is when I use something that reminds me to, yeah, to aid the memoir sort of thing. Yeah. So spiffer is whatever it is. It's a word where each letter stands for something. That's what it is. And the first word, if we were observing movement, what would you guess the first word is? S. Yeah, correct. No. Yeah, they're all good. Seeing could be seeing, but it's actually that was mean. It's sequence, and I've been trying to use that word a little bit. I don't know if you subliminally. Yesterday I was saying the word sequence a lot. You probably don't notice. Notice you did. That was me just putting it in there. So the first one is sequence. Now you also can't be careful, but it pleases me to have a different colour. So if I can say some things about Cipher, it's the chain of motion through the skeleton. For those of you who said skeleton is another S word, that's another way to think of it. Yeah. So it's the sequence. So it's thinking about what's observing when you're seeing somebody moving, and it's like you do that kind of weird thing where you don't undress them, you strip them of their muscles, and you actually have the skeletal view of them. And we do that a bit in the teaching. We bring the skeleton down. Maybe we'll do that today, because that really helps you see the sequence. And so yesterday, that's why I was using the sequence word a lot, because the coordinating, reflection, and extent system, the sequence of events through the skeleton are quite precise. Did you feel that? You know, that when the knees go a little way, then that has an influence by the hip joints into the pelvis, and then they keep going further. The pelvis has an influence by, L5S1 into the vertebrae, and then, if you explore the different vertebrae in the anatomy lesson yesterday, you get that sequence of events. Some vertebrae don't twist relative to each other, they twist the block and all that sort of stuff. That's the sequence. And maybe you heard me talking about the chain of movement a lot yesterday. So hopefully that one makes sense. So P, which I think I said on Monday, there's one sheet of notes I got from Larry's workshop where he actually says cipher, not cipher. So the P can be pathway or trajectory. Right? So I'll put P up. And this, in distinction to the sequence, is the actual path of motion through space. Sorry? Yeah, yeah. So, with sequence, it's about the changing relationship between one bone relative to another. So it's the internal relationship. And the pathway is the relationship of the movement with the relationship to three-dimensional space. So am I going more to the left? Am I going more to the right? Or, in terms of, is it more rotational? Is it in the rotation sort of plane, like more horizontal plane, or is it more flexion extension kind of thing? So flexion extension kind of distinctions would fit into pathway. Now, of course, that happens at the interjoint sequence as well, but with the pathway, we're referencing it to the environment. Directions, yeah, directions. So up and down, twisting, turning, twitching, you know, all that sort of stuff, when there is an orientation to the external. So you can think about the sequence as being the intrinsic kind of movement. And this one is being oriented to the world, three-dimensional space. So, not the ego. There's no ego in Feldenkrais. Why do you laugh? Yes. Initiation. And I use that word a little bit in the last couple of days. So, I mean, we use it all the time. I'm not labouring quite too much. But this is a really obvious one. Where does the movement initiate? Where? Where the movement starts. What would have to come first? Yeah. Yeah. So the nervous system initiates via the muscles, and then the body, then the joints move. Or sometimes the initiation, and you'll feel it on each other, and you'll see it. The initiation actually isn't a movement; it's a holding, or a stiffening, or a shortening, or on a positive side of it could be a stabilizing. So the preparatory stuff might be a good thing, and it might be actually very parasitic. So often, you start to notice in yourself, when I ask you to do something, that the very first thing you do is hold your breath. We would say it'd be a bit of a waste of time. So it might not even be a movement. It might be a tension, something. Yeah. Muscles move the bones. The bones are inert. Okay, we've got 2 F's. I won't talk to you with what to get them. The first one is foundation. So reflect in sort of what you think that means. Yeah, the base. You know what's your contact with the floor? Larry describes it as actually the weight. Now, I'm not going to use his definition. I don't quite like it. Call it the base of support, which is what he's got in his definition. But he actually says how the weight moves over the base of support. How, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. But first of all, when you're observing someone else, what is their base of support? And then what you notice is it's changing nature of the base of support, or the what we notice is the weight shift relative to the base of support. So exactly, yeah. So the example, I'll repeat it for the microphone. So yesterday I was asking you to notice, so all of you had contact with the feet on the one foot on the floor when you were leg crossed. And that, so your foundation is the single foot as opposed to 2 feet. And then the weight shift across that foundation, going from, you know, somewhere in the middle of that leg at the foot, more the inside as you adjust move further and further. So that weight shift and the base of support is what Larry means by. Yeah. 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 That's right. Yeah. And the amount of contact. And so the foundation, in a way, is often what you're scanning for, because we use the floor as a reference. We use the contact with the floor as our reference point so often. And it's the changing contact that gives us the feedback about how we're changing. So the floor is our mirror, our tactile mirror. And you don't have to clean it, isn't it? Yeah, it's foundational. Yeah. And it's understanding how we use. So we, in that context, I think using the ground as feedback, but actually, in martial arts and in life, the ground is where we generate our force. The ground reaction forces. We use the ground to push up. If we didn't have the solid ground, we actually would be forceless. Like space, we would have no power. David Bowie, Major Tom floating around. Sorry, if you don't know my references, that would be a little bit of an odd conversation. Okay, now Larry must be laughing because he used the word first. Well, probably Laban used the word first. I'd gather, but flow. He doesn't mean that thing that's just become very sexy in the mindfulness movement about being in flow. He's talking about, this is the dimension of time, what he's talking about in flow, which is not dissimilar to how the mindful people are talking about flow. That how the motion unfolds in time, how he would describe that. Are you a Labani person? Who's it, Flipper or Emma? So it has a time element in. Right. Yeah. So it's, okay. So it's both. Yeah. It has direction as well. Okay. So so in a way he's kind of simplified it. If he says this is about all of these things have an element of quality about it. Yeah, you can apply a quality parameter to pretty much all of them. Motion unfolding over time. I've underlined time because that's probably the common element that he's pulled out of. So then, therefore, that relates to, yes, is the movement, staccato, that movement, stop, movement, stop, movement, stop. So that's a different kind of flow to, is it continual or is it fast or is it small or is it oscillatory or even? Yep. Yes. So, yes, again, so yesterday I asked you to notice as you're dropping your legs, is there a part where you go faster and then a part where it kind of stops a bit? And that also relates to effort. So these are all extremely interconnected. They're dependent on each other. Yes, yes, and that's what the Laban people were saying. Yeah, because that's right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that, I guess that's what I put time in as the fourth dimension, allied with space. Yeah, that's an important point to remember. Starting to see how these things all connect. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you could put that, I guess. Yes. And you can just understand that time inherently has a spatial characteristic. Implicit. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're starting to see that even though this is always the issue with the framework, isn't it? Because you're differentiating our elements that don't actually stand alone, that they are always interconnected, and one will slide into the other. So we kind of write them in this linear way as if this is this and this is that. as if they're separate things, and actually they don't exist without each other, which is an interesting point. Implicit, it's within. It's inherently within. It's always within. Yeah. Relative to the entity that it's in. Yeah, it's intrinsic. It's a part of its nature. Oh, implicit is part of it. It's there. Explicit means it's externally showing. I'm not giving a very good. Ah, yeah. Implicit and explicit. Yeah. Yeah. Implicit. Yeah. Yeah. And so the implicit, yeah, is actually not always apparent. And sometimes what we're doing is exposing them, because in a way, something that's implicit is like a hidden habit in a way, and we're exposing it and bringing it up to the conscious, saying, is this really what we... They're good questions. Good students. They're very smart in their heads. Okay. Effort is the E. That was kind of obvious. Would you have guessed that one? Yeah. What other E would we have? Maybe energy, but... So effort, patterns of muscle activation. So, you know, you could say force as well, or, you know, energy. I think this is the effector organs are the muscles. They're our main effector organs. So think effort, think muscle. Patterns of muscle activation. What would you like the R to be? What are we obsessed with? Oh! I so set myself up for that one. We are obsessed with rest. And interestingly, yeah, resting's not in there. Yes, it could be reversibility. Could be resistance. This is mean of me. It's so mean of me to do this. Respiration. I think, you know, the point about this is that there are so many other things you can observe in ATM. So this is Larry's lens. We don't all now become Larry and only see like this. So all of the things you've come up with, you don't have to discard. This is just something that you play with. So respiration is in Larry's words, the rhythm and dimensions of breathing. So again, this, you know, when we're talking about rhythm, therefore we're talking about timing, aren't we? We're talking about timing. Rhythm is, you know, the manifestation relative to time. And in dimensions, bring in that spatial idea as well. So this is the time and space of breathing, which we are obsessed with. He's one of our most exquisitely calibrated barometers of our state of being. We can use it as a monitor, we can also use it as an influencer. Okay, let me check my... We'll use this for some of the in-between face-to-face segments, I think, because there's some nice little exercises that I've got here. But if we go back through to sequence, some of the questions that elicit answers related to sequence are what moves where, and he's got where and when. I would say when, so, but anyway. But what moves where, in what kind of, well, no, sequence has an element of timing in it too, of course it does, because this goes first, and this is second, and this is third, and this is fourth. So it has that element of time in it. So what moves where and when? What is moving and what is still? What does and doesn't move, you know, that sort of thing. Something that you can think about, it's a movement of the ... in the ... So it's a movement of the leg. So yesterday, think about the cross knees drop rotating movement. It's a movement of the two legs initially in the hip joint, and then it's a movement of the pelvis, you know, in the L5S1 joints, and then it's a movement of, you know, keep going, blah 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 blah, all that fine. So it's a movement of a part in a particular joint or series. That's a classic way of analysing movement. The third aspect of that usually is the direction. Okay. The direction here is pathway. Other questions you might ask in terms of this observation: are all joints possible in this movement involved? So what we're looking for as a Feldenkrais principle is the inclusivity of the movement. So inherent in sequences are all the things that could be a useful part of this sequence. Are they there in the movement? Are they present in the movement? Or have they disappeared? So, you know, in a sequence of walking, you know, you see some people, let's say if I walk like this, there's a sequence that's not happening somewhere, that there is no movement of my foot in my ankle joint, there is no movement of my shin bone in my knee joint. So there is, it's absent. My knee and my ankle were not present in movement in the sequence of that pattern. So that's sort of clear, you know, and that's called a limp. And we're actually very good at seeing people who limp, seeing people who limp. I'm not necessarily good at analysing why or how they're limping, but if someone's limping, you know, from across the street, you can see that somebody's limping. They are really wired up to see these these differences in sequences of movement. What you haven't learnt inherently is necessarily analyse why, and that's what we do here. We see what is missing. Having experienced on ourselves time and time again what is possible. So the understanding of the likely sequence, and you know, Zoran's kept saying the expectations of the sequence, you are developing that database in this program. That's why the program takes so long. You know, and because it's this catalogue, inventory, possibilities that you're generating here, textbooks that you are writing for yourself in here about these possibilities that help you to start seeing sequences. Okay, another question about sequence. Oh yeah. Okay, pathway or trajectory. So as I mentioned, this is the 3D spatial element. So the questions that could be asked is, how is the, you know, a part moving through space? So you know, maybe it's the whole body is moving through space, but often, you know, there is one part moving and other parts not. So again, if you go back to the coordinating flexion extensors movement, the parts that are moving through space, you know, the legs are being rotated through space in the, you know, from the person's orientation in a horizontal plane, then they're rotated back. And it's a rotation kind of movement, or a twisting movement. And you don't need to say, you analyse it's a horizontal plane, but it's rotation, it's like twisting movement. So that's what your clients will understand. So you're observing a localised place in the skeleton. How is it? Not how is it moving through space. That's an analysis of what's causing it to move. It's where is it moving through space? I do love correcting people that are moving their notes. And he's not here to defend himself. Which is why Larry and I such an interesting time. Another question to ask, if you put an arrow on that place, where would it point? Again, we'll set you up with tasks to use these questions, apply these questions with your study, with yourself, then with your study buddy in small groups in between segments. I hope, Jenny, you're remembering that I've said all this about the online environment, because you know what I'll forget. So we're going to do all this stuff and I'll forget something. You know, and observing more than one place. So are all the arrows going the same way, or are some arrows crossing, or they're going in a different direction? So, you know, there's a variation of those, that twisting lessons, where the arms go to the left and the legs go to the right. You've all done that. So the arrows, therefore, are opposing each other, and then they're coming actually back towards each other. Or, you know, you had the force where, you know, you had applied a sort of static kind of movement where your legs were twisted one way, and then you did, you know, the flexion kind of movement of the upper body relative to a twisted lower body. So the arrows are different body parts. And again, those kinds of relationships through space, you are, whether you know it or not, by doing all these ATMs relentlessly with us hammering them, you are experiencing these things. How do the different parts relate is what I've just said. Okay. So that's another thing that you could look at. Now, like any framework, and we've just sectioned them out, you know, you can use just one thing to look at. I'm only going to look at the sequence. Only going to look at the pathway. Only going to look at the initiation. That's the beauty of breaking something down like this. And then as you get better, you get more expert, you just see quicker. That's the building up of it. So even Larry came and taught this to us when we'd been graduated for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. So for us, this was like a retrofit of a framework. And in a way, it's a slight retrofit for you, because you've all got your way of observing that's kind of formalizing it. I'm saying that because I don't want you to feel like this is new. It's just organizing what you do already. Initiation, we've talked about it. Questions to ask is, you know, obviously lots of things are happening in a complex movement. Is there a simultaneous initiation in multiple parts of the body, or is it sequential? For example, fundamental properties of movement, I asked you to initiate 2 separate movements at the same time, lifting the arm and lifting the leg on the same side. So that there was a slightly simultaneous, theoretically simultaneous initiation. So you had to sense, watching your students, you had to observe, was there a simultaneous initiation in 2 separate body parts, or was it sequential? Or was there some common initiation first, and for a lot of you it was holding your breath? Do you remember? Is there a smooth transition into action, or are there preparatory movements? So the preparatory movement would be something like a stabilizing movement, or a breath hold, or a getting ready to push on the ground. So you're thinking of lifting something, so you organize yourself. So even though the movement is lifting away from the floor, the preparatory movement is organizing the push into the floor to generate lift. Yeah. So the initiating movement might not be the intended movement, it's a preparatory one. Yeah, so it's the actual initial, the initial initiator. Yeah, yeah. That is actually the first initiation, if you like. And we can be fooled, and we can miss that. We can think, oh, I'm initiating lifting my arm up by contracting the front of my shoulder. But actually what we might have missed is that initial initiation is actually pushing my rib cage back into the floor. Maybe. And that's what we're becoming aware of, is the hidden initiators. And are they? And then because they're now conscious, we're aware of them. Our nervous system can decide whether they're actually useful or not. Somewhere else. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And we might consciously in the lesson explicitly ask people to change initiators. We don't leave it. Yeah. Okay. Does it begin on the right or the left, the upper or the lower, the proximal or the basically saying where? Where does it begin? Where does the movement begin? So, there's some, it's really interesting to think about initiation. Maybe we'll have a day for each of these things, where, you have sequence days, which is some week. I wonder if we can convince Zoran to have a day each week for this. Because an initiation day would be really fun. It's not like an initiation as in a right, you have to have a Feldenkrais tattoo. Not that kind of initiation. But I'm just thinking, if we sent you out in the streets to, for your lunch, having a lunchtime activity, or just sitting in a cafe and watching when people begin emotion, where do they begin? The thing that immediately sprang to mind was when people are doing one of those funny sporty activities, like maybe you stick the pole in the ground and you jump. They go backwards and then they go forward. That's an image that immediately sprang into mind. So that's a really obvious thing where the initiating movement is counter to the, you think, oh, the motion is running forward. That's the intention, is running forward. The initiation is, the preparatory thing is they go backwards, they rock backwards and then they go forward, to get that momentum. So that's an example of preparatory. Yeah. Yeah, tennis. Yeah. It's got all these little behaviours. Touch his nose, yes, and the does. All right. And then he does the thing. Yeah, so this is all parasitic action. It's actually not germane to anything, but psychologically, he's obviously on the OCD kind of. But we all are. And that's what you'll observe with your students, that they will have these things that are actually unnecessary in a, pragmatic sense, but they've associated this with success. Like if I don't touch my nose and hitch up my pants, then I'm going to do a bad shot. Then that's an OCD thought train. But if I don't do this, something bad's going to happen. Obsessive compulsive disorder. We've all got it. There's a little bit of OCD in all of it. Narayan. It could be that way, but we would then say that the preparatory movement is the true initiating movement for them in that moment. Yeah. 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 And you talk to psychologists about people with cross motivation. This sort of stuff happens all the time. We do the opposite of what we want. I immediately started thinking about, the little boy, a little bit stereotypically, but the little boy in the school ground who really likes the girls, so he likes the girls. Yeah. 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 That's really common because they can't utilize the ground force of the floor. You have to have your center of mass in front of the foundation so that when you push, you actually go forward. If your center of mass is towards the back of the foundation, you push and go backwards. So they're still learning about where they are on the foundation. Really interesting. Okay, so they're the initiation questions. So that, you know, there are the real initiators, and then there are the apparent ones. Yep. Yeah. Yes, that was part of it. And the direction, you know, relative to up and down and left and right, and yep, right. And different body parts have different pathways. Foundation, so how the weight moves over the base of support, which I've just talked about. Does the foundation change, or is it static? So if the lesson is always on your back, there might not be, you know, changing foundation, but there still might be weight shift around the foundation, but it might not. The contact might not change, but the depth of contact might change. Or the foundation or the base of support might be constantly changing, which is the definition of a mobility task, like walking. You're constantly making a new base of support, constantly making a new foundation. Why it's so dynamic. And then how's the weight shifting of the base, which we said. In the transition, is that transition into action smooth, or are there preparatory movements that shift the weight, which we talked about? Larry's got a bit of jargon. There's a bit here. I'll read it out to you. Is it within the polygon of support? Polygon, and I don't know what he means by that. So this is the danger of Feldy double. Polygon of support. No. Is there a Levant thing about polygon of support? Have you made this up? Primary image? See? Multi-sided, yep. Yeah. Yeah. The polygon means multi-sided, does it? Not any particular side. Several sides. It's sided. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's yes. I've got you. The polygon means it's got sides of any whatever. We don't know how many sides, but it's got sides. Sided shape. Yeah. So if you think about your base of support, it always has a shape. Yeah. And it could be a tripod, could be a triangle, could be whatever. Okay. Thank you. Mystery solved. See? Collective minds, a beautiful thing. Now, and what he's saying there is something we talked about, hopefully, my memory serves me correctly, maybe we did it in between segments, face-to-face segments, is that the definition of balance is that your center of mass, center of gravity, falls within your base of support, within your foundation. And if my center of mass falls outside of it, that is the definition of falling. So if I've got my base of support now is my feet, contact with the feet and the area between my feet, so it's roughly, you know, so let's say in a polygon term, it's almost like a rectangle, and my relative center of mass, which is quite standing, is in front of my sacrum. From here, I can move forwards and backwards, and the straight line down from my center of mass to the floor, where it hits the floor, is always within my base of support if I'm balanced. If I take my center of mass and the straight line down to the floor moves outside, then I fall. Gosh, that happened. So that's what we're talking about there. And interestingly, you know, the kata is that's why it's so difficult. It's because you've got this little base of support of your butt, and you are leaning backwards and coming forwards. At the moment, you've still got a base of support with your hands there. So you've increased the area of your base of support, so you don't feel so much falling. But Gloria, interestingly, you know, as you said on Monday, she could feel immediately that's where we were going. We were playing around with how do we keep our center of mass in this base of support without falling. So the center of support has to adjust, and what the kata is about, in one way, looking at it, is we're going so slowly, we're organizing our trunk such that our centre of mass is still within the base of support. And that's why the bringing the arms forward helps. One of the reasons why it helps. One of the million reasons why. Okay, foundation. Flow. Flow. I always have to say flow is either my great-grandparents or my great-great-grandparents were called Ebenezer and Florence. And that means that their short names were Ebb and Flow. And I, of course, never met them, but my mum did. It's quite nice, isn't it? I mean, turning horrible Ebenezer and Florence. So flow, I always think of my whatever, great. Okay, so flow is about the quality of movement. It's more about the how that rather than where or what. It's the rhythm or musicality of movement. So the questions you could ask when you're observing people moving is the movement fluid or jerky? Which is exactly what Philip has said is or no, so it doesn't have those sorts of qualities. And you felt that, right? You know, when we're doing that lowering movement of the shoulders, some of you had that movement as your shoulder came back to the floor. That's, you know, the sort of jerky quality. That's a different kind of flow to when your shoulder just slowly lowers. Yeah, you understand this kind of quality. Is the movement successive or simultaneous? More back to timing as well, unfolding over timing. Is the flow interrupted, which is again that sort of jerky element? Does it change speed, which was your point, Kat, about, you know, you know, the pathway of the movement might be speed up in some parts and then slow down in others. And that's related to effort. What parts of the sequence flow differently than others? And we do muck around with timing. There's a whole lot of sort of syncopated lessons. Alan Costello teaches them, not where you want to fill in, where you set up a rhythm in one limb and then a different rhythm in another limb and a different rhythm in another. You know, you keep adding this, and it's, you know, so for example, for drummers, that's their bread and butter, being able to do that. But it's differentiating body parts with living on the different rhythm. It's really an extraordinary thing. You know, when you look at a drummer, you know, they might be the dumb arts in the band, but they're not really. You know, it's really smart. Effort, so the patterns of muscle activation. Questions to ask. Well, actually, there's a fundamental question. Here's which muscles are acting would be one I'd add in. And the other muscle groups, are they working together? Are they working against each other? Are they helping or are they limiting? So, you know, and we often talk about, you know, other muscles in the system, you know, forces for good or forces for evil. And what we're getting rid of are the forces for evil, the ones that are holding us back. Is there any place working harder than seems necessary? Or, and I would add the opposite to that. Is there any place that seems to be underworking? And of course, you know, effort is a big thing for us. The sense of effort is, I probably said to you, you know, it's probably the least understood sense. It's the one that we are, in a way, the most interested in developing. And it's a very interesting sense from a neurological point of view, because what we're actually sensing, not sensing an input, we're sensing an output from the brain, sensing how much drive the brain is generating to get the sense of effort. It's a very, 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 so the brain is monitoring its output. So from an engineering point of view, I think that is quite you know, if you want to throw a cat amongst the pigeons with a bunch of neurophysiologists, get them to have an argument about what's better. Just saying, if you had a party and you realise, oh, my funny word, everybody here is a neurophysiologist. How will I get them started? How will I get this party started? And then respiration. What do I mean? Because we don't understand really how we do it. But in the room here, you are now pretty much experts in sensing effort. Your palate is getting really sharp for sensing effort. However, from a physiological point of view, we're not entirely sure how we do it. So isn't that that's marvelous, isn't it? That we do something at an expert level without really understanding how we do it. Marvelous. So questions to ask about breathing. I love this question. Do they breathe? Yes or no? It could be dead or not. Hello? So this is like this. Yeah, that's right. Holding. So when do they breathe? Where do they breathe? Where in themselves they breathe, and where in the movement do they breathe, actually. And I've been quite relentlessly systematic about those questions of breathing in the two ATM, in the ATM books I've taught so far. I've really stylized it, if you've noticed. Do the movement on an inhalation, do the movement on an exhalation, do it on a held breath. That's a really stylized, simplistic way of getting people to notice the influence of the breath. Yeah, that's right. You know, and in yoga, there is a prescribed correct way of timing the breath. And I think I said yesterday that maybe a bit of a throwaway line. What I'm really interested in is go back, you teach the ATMs from the ATM book, and he does say there's a correct way. Like you lift the arm and the leg on the exhalation. That's the best way. He says it. Whereas he changed his mind. And the way we teach now in Amherst is you do it on the inhalation and the exhalation and everything else. And then can you do it regardless of where you are in the breath cycle? So what I often refer to is, can you divorce those two things so they go their separate ways? And that breathing is something that is non-negotiable and uninterrupted. That I can breathe in and out and do it and so on. So that's the evolution of his thinking with breath. But he started with that very yogic, scripted right and wrong timing, and ended up with what we now promote, which is that the breathing is sacrosanct and it should remain uninterrupted regardless of where we are in the cycle. Without interfering, exactly. And that's the words you start to use more. When you do the movement without interfering with your breath. That's really interesting. It's a really interesting shift. Yeah. You. Yeah. 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 And there might be an inherently better time for it. Yeah. That's it. And then Narayan. Yeah. 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 And then it means, of course, that things like speaking can happen regardless of movement. Now, if a dancer had to hold their breath to particular moves all the time, they would be pretty out of breath. So, you know, that activity is a classic where you're doing repetitive movements, and if you have to time the in-breath and the out-breath all the time. Yeah. So I can see, you know, it's great that he ended up with a pretty sensible notion of having movement happening without interfering. And the one that neuron. But yeah. 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 the sacrosanct was just me being floral with words. I mean, sacred. And what he is interested, that you point about the breathing is, yes, that we don't want to have to be aware of it all the time, but we bring it up to consciousness, become aware of it as a tool for practicing awareness, and then let it sink back down into unconsciousness, like this says. So we can be aware of it, and then we can let it go and not be aware of it. Yeah, yeah. So I just made it worse, didn't I? Essential, right? Yeah. I reckon I'd let go of that. I reckon I'd let go of that word for the moment. I actually can't remember what I said it in context of. Yeah. Acrostic. That's it. Yeah. 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 Oh, that is fantastic. I knew there was a special word for these bloody things. It's acrostic. Yeah. Yeah. We're good? Okay, sorry. I'll stop doing this. Words are so yummy. Can't help it. But it's all right, does the inhalation exhalation go along with the demands of the movement or against it, for example? How does the breathing relate to the action? All those sorts of things. So that's respiration. All right, I reckon that's enough. I might astonish you all by having a tea break at the proper tea break time today, just to be radical. Everyone's just going, what? A tea break at the time of a tea break?